Welcome. I'm Joanna Hildreth with the Catoosa County Republican Party's Candidate Interview Committee. Let's take a minute for the other members to introduce themselves.
Denise Burns.
Michael Powell.
Thank you for taking the time out of your campaign to participate in this interview process. We have extended this invitation to all candidates in this race for the purpose of aiding the voters in making their decisions. This video will appear on the Catoosa County Republican Party website. While we do everything to prevent anyone from obtaining the video without proper request or use, we cannot guarantee that the video will not be obtained by others regardless of our best attempts to secure it. The interview will be shown in its entirety. For the interview, we will be asking around 12 questions but can offer no prompting. There are no right or wrong answers, only your answers. We ask each candidate the same questions. Please introduce yourself and state the position you're running for.
My name is Ben Scott, and I'm a candidate for Sheriff of Catoosa County.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Let's go ahead and get started with the questions. How does the Republican platform tie into your vision as the Sheriff of Catoosa County?
The conservative platform, and I consider the Republican platform to be a conservative platform, fiscally responsible, to make sure that we're good stewards of the tax money, but as well as that, to support and defend the rights of the American citizens, to make sure that we do everything we can to uphold the law, be fair and compassionate.
Thank you. How does the Constitution shape your vision as sheriff?
The Constitution is the basis for all our laws, and as the sheriff in the state of Georgia as a constitutional officer is required to run a jail, but they also are required to enforce the law. And all laws are based on the Bill of Rights. That's where everything emanates from. There's a lot of discussion these days about the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. But there are other amendments that are just as important: search and seizure, speedy trial, right to self-incrimination, right to an attorney. And all those rights have to be respected for every citizen, whether they're encountered during an interview process or whether you're making an arrest. So we have to make sure that as we go forward, that every decision we make, or every decision that I make as sheriff, is based on the oath of office that I take as the first and foremost consideration.
Do you believe that federal departments such as the DHS, TSA, and DEA are undermining the constitutional role of sheriff, particularly in regard to budget controls?
Budget controls, the budget of the sheriff's office is of course given to the sheriff through the county commission, and that's where the budget emanates from. Budget controls, whether or not, I'm not sure if you're asking about budget controls for money that's given to departments through the federal government by grants, or whether you're talking about seizure monies obtained through asset forfeiture seizing programs. So there's several different items there with the budgetary issues and concerns. First, the primary budget of the sheriff's office, like I say, received from the taxpayers at Catoosa County. There should be ability to apply for federal grants if they're available. However, a sheriff has to make sure that if he applies for a grant, that grant doesn't conflict with the duties that he has as the sheriff of Catoosa County. And when you talk about the federal agencies, some people worry about the federalization of criminal law. And you have to guard against the federalization of criminal law to make sure that the federal agencies have authority granted to them by Congress. It's a stopgap. It's not meant for them to come in and investigate your robberies, your burglaries. It's to cover things that can't be. A sheriff's responsibility will stop at a state line. There are crimes that go over state lines. So when you're looking at resources, there is a role for the agencies to play, but everybody has to drive in their own lane, so to speak, and make sure that they don't overstep their bounds.
What do you think about no-knock warrants as it relates to the Fourth Amendment?
There is a provision for no-knock warrants. A no-knock warrant should be one of the most, if you can get one, and many judges will not sign a no-knock warrant. A no-knock warrant is usually used in cases where there is very good evidence that there is a reason that something will happen to the officers, that there's a danger that you would have if you had to knock and announce. There was a danger there. No-knock warrants, as a general rule, should not be used. They should not be used. It should be only the most extraordinary circumstances where you should ever even request for a no-knock warrant. Search and seizure and the right to be safe from illegal search and seizure is very important. It's covered in the Bill of Rights. So when you talk about no-knock warrants, a lot of people consider a no-knock warrant to be something you just obtain, helter-skelter, and just run out and get a no-knock warrant. You shouldn't be able to do that. Only in the most extraordinary of circumstances where the danger exists to the extent to where there would be a loss of life on either side, either by the person executing the warrant or the person that executed the warrant on. So no-knock warrants should be the exception and very, very, very rarely used, if ever.
Do you believe that locally elected sheriffs are accountable to the people and are supposed to be the chief law enforcement officer of the county, bar none?
The sheriff is the highest law enforcement official in the county, and they are put in office by the electors, by the residents, citizens, the voters of Catoosa County, and they are to be held accountable by the citizens of Catoosa County. And when you say bar none, I don't know if you're referring to, is there anybody else's authority that exceeds the sheriff in law enforcement matters in the county? The sheriff is the highest law enforcement officer in the county, and his authority is there. However, you look at other agencies, and we're not even have to talk about federal agencies, you look at state agencies like the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. What role do they play? You look at the sheriff, but then you look at the police departments inside Catoosa County, like Fort Oglethorpe and Ringgold. They have chiefs of police, they have officers. What role do they play? So are they expected to call the sheriff and request permission every time they make an arrest if the sheriff's the highest law enforcement officer in the county? And only things are only done at his approval? And if you have a sheriff, and we hope that it never happens, but if you have a sheriff who is actually corrupt, criminally corrupt, then someone has to investigate that sheriff. Sometimes it could be the Attorney General's office of the state of Georgia, it could be the GBI. But if you're in an investigation, you have to clear everything with the sheriff if it's on the actual sheriff, or if he decides that a person that the investigation is being conducted on is one of his friends and doesn't want it done, he shuts it down, then that's not fair to the citizens either. So the sheriff is the highest law enforcement officer in the county and should be respected and should be there. However, he has to work in close cooperation with his peers to make sure that everybody understands their respective roles, and the sheriff, as a constitutional officer, would have the highest role of authority, but he has to understand that he has to work with his peers to make sure that the safety and security of the citizens is protected.
Do you believe that federal agents must operate with the approval of the sheriff or not at all?
Not at all is an all-encompassing part of that statement. To work with the approval of the sheriff, if you're a Secret Service agent and someone attempts to assassinate the president, would you say that the Secret Service agent would need the permission of the sheriff in that county to make that arrest? I think that they would be able to make the arrest without the approval of that particular sheriff in that particular jurisdiction. When you enter into an investigation and you enter into another area, another county, whatever else, you should be able to go to the law enforcement officer there in charge and work in a joint manner. In which case then you don't have to go and ask, listen, I need specific approval to go work all by myself. However, there may be some investigations that are just traversing a county. They may start in Kentucky, go through Tennessee, and then go through Georgia. And as you go through those investigations there, you're ultimately going to come to a place where you're going to make an arrest on a particular investigation. There, you would call the sheriff and say, we're going to make some arrests in your county. This is what we're doing, and this is where we're at. Those should be joint investigations to begin with. Not all circumstances are the same in every investigation. That's why federal agents should be a stopgap measure to investigate the things where the sheriff doesn't have the constitutional authority to go past the state line. If he goes over the state line, if you're interstate trafficking of child exploitation, for example, if you're taking children across state lines or white slavery, whatever it is, then you have to have somebody that can move across those lines and execute a law and make an arrest for a crime that's committed in multiple jurisdictions. And I believe that the sheriff would be consulted on almost every case. If you have a sheriff where it is known that the sheriff, and there have been cases in the United States of sheriffs that were just criminally corrupt, and in those cases, you would have to say, should we notify them or should we not? There would be other agencies to work for them. The same would apply not just federal agents, but it would apply for the state agencies as well. You have the Georgia State Patrol, you have the GBI. So if you have those agencies, with those agencies, if they're working an investigation, then would you want them also to call the sheriff, and if the investigation is on the sheriff, so to speak. So you would have to be very careful with that. Generally, you would call the sheriff, you would make sure that the sheriff would be part of your investigation, and it would be one that everybody could participate in and everyone's interested in.
What changes would you bring to the county sheriff's office over the next 4 years?
One of the major changes I would bring to the sheriff's office is more transparency and accountability. I think the sheriff's office in Catoosa County has the second largest budget in Catoosa County. The school system has the first. As part of that, I think there's a duty upon the sheriff to make sure that he executes his authority first and foremost to protect the citizens' safety and security, uphold the law. He needs to do that in a fair and impartial manner. I don't think that there's room for favoritism or politics in the sheriff's department. I think that you should take your oath, you should execute it well, and that to do that, a well-informed public is the biggest thing that you can do to make sure that you have the support of the citizens. So transparency, I believe, is one of the most important things the sheriff's department can do. If you have transparency, you shouldn't make people file requests for things you should already be able to get. As a sheriff, one of the things I would do is I would create an annual report of the sheriff's office. What we do, what we're doing, what we want to do, what our budget is, where we spend our money, how many employees we have, what we intend to do, our crime statistics, the way we spend our money, what we need, what we don't need. I'd also be willing, if I want something or need something and I don't have it in my budget, I would be willing to sit down and formulate a plan, a particular process to go to the commission and argue for what I think is necessary and be willing to defend that at town hall meetings. Not just go in front of the commission and ask for, I need an extra $200,000 or $100,000. If I need something that's over and above my budget, then I would be willing to go and explain that to the citizens in any forum. And if I feel strongly enough about it, and I would if I went to that extent, to argue for that. If the commission decides not to give it, if the citizen doesn't give it to me, I would work with that. But I would be willing to argue with that. But when you're looking at your budget, you can't request the same budget year after year after year because I got this much last year, I want this much this year. That's one of the changes. I think that every budget in the sheriff's office should start off from a zero-based budgeting. You should look and say, do I need that much money? Not, this is what we got last year, so we'll ask for the same thing. So the budgeting process would be something else that I would do. I would also make sure that any program that I instituted at the sheriff's office would have a metrics for success. It would be definable, you would understand the goals, it would be reachable and obtainable goals, and a report would be issued about whether or not we're successful or not. If you're not successful, if you don't do some sort of a cost-benefit analysis for everything you do, then you're not going to be successful. If you've got a program that's not working, you should be willing to discontinue that program and try something else. And if you didn't succeed, you should be willing to say, this program failed, it didn't work. But you should also be willing to say, I know it didn't work, and so I've stopped it. So those are some of the changes that I would bring to the sheriff's office.
If elected sheriff, could you make cuts to the budget and maintain or increase current service levels? Please explain your answer.
Not having access except to the general budget, and for example, there are line items on that budget for salaries, for example. Without having those actual details of those budgets and going through a budget line by line, I would not be able to know that I could maintain, increase, or decrease the particular budget in the particular ways it's been in there. I think there needs to be a top-to-bottom review of the budget as it exists now to make those determinations. If we see that we don't need money in one spot, you shouldn't necessarily just, we don't need money over here, we can automatically move it to another location, and that's allowed, as from what my understanding is, that's allowed as long as it's within the overall budget of the sheriff's office. I can take money from, Section 1 and move it to Section C or Section 2 if I want to, as long as it stays within the parameters of the budget. When you do that, that might be a place where you should have cut something as opposed to moving money over here so that you can expand something to keep the same amount of money that you had to begin with. It's moving the shells around, which piece the shell under. So you want to make sure that you are not cutting one spot to increase another spot. If you don't need the money, you should cut it to uphold the services we have. I think that we need to make sure that we maintain enough officers to maintain those services. Again, if I find that there are not enough officers to maintain those services, I would request more officers. If I find that we have enough officers and we don't need as many as we got, then through attrition, I would reduce those officers and not have as many. I know that almost every department always comes in Catoosa County government, they come in at budget. Well, coming in at budget is not necessarily a successful measure as far as I'm concerned. The fact that you didn't go over is admirable, but could you have actually have cut someplace, or did you take that money and spend it when you could have saved it? And those are the ways that I look at the budget.
What are your full views on the recent militarization of local police departments?
Militarization of police, nobody wants their departments militarized at all. I think that you have to look, and a lot of emphasis was put on it because of the type of weaponry that was being obtained, the fact that the military was surplusing a lot of equipment and turning that equipment over to local agencies, and agencies were receiving free equipment. And when you talk about the militarization of the police department, I think you have to be able to separate out different things. Is it militarization? People consider militarization the fact that you have, you're now carrying, AR-15s as part of your arsenal. Are they considering the fact that I've got a Humvee that was surplus vehicles? Or are they considering the fact that I got a tank? If we're talking about I picked up a tank or Bradley vehicle from the military, that's unnecessary. I don't think a local sheriff's department would need that type of equipment. And if you were to need something like that, you probably could borrow one from the closest Army base if you needed it. But other equipment is far to enhance your capabilities. And if you had officers that were walking around daily doing their routine duties, and every time they get out of their car, they swing an AR-15 over their shoulder, then that would be militarization of the police department. We don't have anybody that's doing that, nor would I allow that. However, in tactical situations, as in the one in Chattanooga recently, where the military officers and military personnel were killed, had it not have been for some more militaristic style weapons, the AR-15, not the military version, but the AR-15s, that outcome might have been different. We'll never know for sure, but those weapons assisted in that, taking that suspect down to prevent any further harm. So when you look at militarization of your police department, I think you have to look past just, nobody should be getting tanks. Nobody should be doing that. There is a rank structure in a police department. You have officers, you have sergeants, you have lieutenants. So while it's not a paramilitary organization, in the true terms of a paramilitary organization called up to assist the military, you do have a rank structure there. There are uniforms there. So you have to be very careful to make sure that you make sure you stay in your own lane, that you don't get outside your authority. And if you start to stray from your authority, that's when problems start to matter.
What makes you the best candidate in the Republican field?
I feel like I'm the most experienced candidate. I have over 32 years of law enforcement experience. I have 3 years, the last 3 years, I've worked as an investigator, primarily handling court-appointed special investigator cases for defense investigators to work on cases where they can't afford, an attorney can't afford an investigator and the court appoints one. So I have worked cases from both the concept of from the police side where you're making the arrest and also on the defense side where I'm talking to the actual defendant. I didn't do it, whatever he didn't do it, determining alibis, determining witnesses. So I've seen the judicial system from both sides now. I think that is a real asset and something that no one else in this race can offer. In addition to that, I have local, national, and international experience. I've been exposed to a lot of different cultures, a lot of different states, a lot of different people. I'm also the only person that I believe is truly independent in this race. I won't promise anybody anything. I would love to have people support me, but if it requires a promise of anything other than upholding the oath of office, then I won't promise that. So I am truly independent. I don't come with any kind of 30, 40 years of I won't say biases or preconceived ideas. I'm independent. I will be able to make the decisions that's necessary to make sure the sheriff's office is fair and that justice is upheld and everyone is treated equally. And making me the best candidate for the sheriff, I think I have that level of experience, the education. I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of specialized training in law enforcement, and with all that combined with my experience, my education, and my independence, and my desire for transparency and accountability, I think I would be the best candidate for Catoosa County Sheriff.
All right, we're at our last question. Who is your favorite Republican from the past or present?
Favorite Republican from the past or present? Well, I would have to say that one of my favorite Republicans from the past would have to be probably Abraham Lincoln, because he presided over a time in this country when it was seriously divided. There may be other times the country's been divided, but there it actually erupted into civil war, and this country was divided. And a country, just like a sheriff's department, a country divided can't be as strong as when you work together, when you're together. So I'd have to say Abraham Lincoln as far as a Republican past. Republican present, depends on how close to the president you really want to get. So I would have to say that there are many people that are the Republican Party that uphold conservative values. And I would have to say that there's going to be a very interesting Republican race coming up for president, but I will stick with the Republican of the past.
Well, thank you very much. This concludes the interview, and we appreciate that you took the time to participate in our process.
Thank you.